First of all, I have the highest respect for both of you. I consider you to be personal friends as well as certainly great career guys in carrying out your mission. But I think it's important to maybe approach this budget thing a little bit differently. We all know that you guys receive a budget, and the budget comes from the Commander-in-Chief, and you're going to have to carry it out, and you're two both very, very competent to do that. However, the variable, as Senator Lieberman says, in this is risk. And I look at what's happening now, that in this administration, in 4 budgets, we've got $5.3 trillion of deficit, more than all deficit every president in history. And the fiscal year that we're talking about now, $1.3 trillion. And the only real hits are defense. You could zero out the defense budget and the OCO, that adds up to about, what, $614 billion, and still have a $500 billion deficit. So I look at that and I think, where is the money going? Because it's not going to defense. But let me just kind of put this into perspective that I think is significant. At our peak, that would have been 2008 and 2009, we had approximately 188,000 troops deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. There also were over 100,000 service members deployed within the CENTCOM AOR in a supporting role. During those years, the Secretary and the Chief of the Army, at that time that would have been Pete Guerin and General Casey, I guess, they repeatedly briefed Congress, us, right here in this room, about an Army out of balance, that the demand for ground forces exceeded the supply, that we needed to continue with the 15-month rotations, and that constant conflict since 9/11 had stretched and stressed all of our volunteer force. The 2010 QDR, which was the time frame that we're talking about now, that I just read about, said, and I'm quoting now, in the mid to long range term, U.S. military forces must plan to prepare and prevail in a broad range of operations that may occur in multiple theaters in overlapping time frames. This includes maintaining the ability to prevail against 2 capable nation-state aggressors. Now, the new strategic policy, which I can actually read out of here, talks about the objectives in one region by conducting a combined arms campaign. Well, I guess the first thing, before I ask you, were they wrong, is to go back and remember when you and I, Mr. Secretary, sat next to each other on the House Armed Services Committee. And I remember so well the last year before I came to the Senate, we had someone testifying that in 10 years we'd no longer need ground forces. And you remember that too. We talked about it at the time. So what I'm saying is we don't know. What we do today is going to reflect where we're going to be in the future. So the 2 statements that I read there, do you think that Casey and Guerin were wrong at that time? Has something changed to change the level of hostility out there?
I don't think they were wrong, but things have changed. First of all, when they appeared before both houses of Congress, they were in 2 simultaneous wars. I don't think they had really on the ground had the opportunity to totally get the upper hand, and the pace of deployments was such to growing to try to sustain those 2 theaters. Today, as you know, Senator, we're out of Iraq. We've already begun to draw down forces in Afghanistan. And as I understand the agreement amongst the allied nations, the coalition in Afghanistan, the plan is to transition all control of combat operations to the Afghanis by the end of 2014, which presumably will allow us to draw down even more. We've restored, even as we come down, nearly to 1.2, just a few tenths of a percentage below it on average, our BOG dwell times. I can tell you if the military services had to write their own budgets, I'm not sure any of us would have picked these particular figures, but as you noted, that's not how it works. We had the Budget Control Act passed by both houses and signed by the President, within which we had to do the best we could.
Exactly, and understand that. And I know that the situation has changed since that time. I still look at this and look at this stress. We're the ones up here, and you used to be in this position where you'd be talking to your reserve components back home, and you saw as their op-tempo went up, you know what, so I would probably have a hard time, even though we are drawing down right now, not knowing what's in the future, we can't consider the op-tempo for our Guard and our Reserve to maintain the same thing. My time's getting low here, so I want to cover two other things real quickly. First of all, on the adjustments in TRICARE, the Obama budget has calls for military families and retirees to pay sharply more in their health care over 5 years compared to current fees. The fiscal year budget proposed would increase the enrollment fees by 94% and up to 345% for some retirees. There's an article that you probably read by Bill Gertz that was in just last week. He said, and I'm quoting now, the administration officials told Congress that one goal of the increased fees is to force military retirees to reduce their involvement in TRICARE and eventually opt out of the program in favor of alternatives established by the 2010 Patient Protection, or in other words, the Obamacare. Got any thoughts about that? Well, first of all, do you think it's an issue of fairness in terms of the increase in the co-pays that are in this budget?
We think it's an action of necessity. And the facts are irrefutable. Over the last 10 years, the cost of the defense health programs has doubled. And like in the civilian sector, painfully but undeniably, if we don't do something to get that cost growth under control, we're going to be in jeopardy of losing the entire program. And we worked on this very meticulously. It was not something we enjoyed doing, not something we wanted to do. But if you look at the increases as proposed, I think at the end of the 5-year period, you'll still have an enormously generous benefit that these men and women who served in uniform not only deserve, but in our minds earned. And for example,
I think I'm just out of time almost here, Mr. Secretary, and I agree with what you're saying. I agree. General Odierno, I was one of them, and back when we were seated next to each other in the House Armed Services Committee when then President Bush canceled the Crusader program. And we're very distressed. In fact, one member actually retired, and Secretary McHugh, you remember our good friend from Oklahoma, because of the way that happened. And so I'm critical there of a certainly Republican administration. Then we went through the NLOS canon. We went through the cancellation of FCS. Now we're kind of left with the latest version of the old Paladin technology. And my concern is the PIM program. I'm very much for it, and we've got to have that capability. I know that both of you understand that and appreciate that, but is there any way to accelerate that? Right now you're looking at 4 years out, and it would seem to me we ought to be able to get that capability prior to maybe in a 2-year period of time. Have you thought about that?
We have looked at all different courses of action, Senator. We're trying to balance across the entire modernization program how we do this. We believe in the PIM program. It actually takes some of the technologies out of the NLOS and integrates it into the Paladin. Mm-hmm. So we're very excited about that, and we think it's something that we have to continue to build. But as we look at the adjustments we've made, it's difficult for us to speed up programs right now as we try to sustain a balanced modernization program across all of our systems. With
the limited resources, and I agree with that, and you got your ground combat vehicle to consider and all of that. Well, you're doing the very best you can with what you have, with the hand that you're dealt, and we need to deal you a better hand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Senator Reed.